of the things that really interested me in this film is this idea of amateurism in
Hmm.
sport and like the value that they place on that because I wasn't really aware that up until like the late 1980s the Olympics were limited to amateurs. And any
Yeah.
hint of professionalism was disliked. And this
Well, you see that that's one of the weirdest things about it for a modern viewer watching all of these running segments is their technique is all over the
right,
place.
right.
Like their arms are flailing, like everything is sort of all over the place. So that's one of the things that makes viewing it sort of a strange experience for the modern viewer is there's just no semblance of technique, and we don't realize how used we are to watching sportsmen and sportswomen just have excellent
Right.
technique.
But like I think there's something to be said for this. So the you know the guys at the college, the heads of the college or whatever their position is, are kind of being hard on Abrams for acting like a professional and having a professional trainer.
Yep.
And they're kind of anti-Semitic, so we sympathize with him. But I think the movie also gives us reason to compare Abrams with Little. And even
Yes.
though they're both admirable, I think Little is the one who embodies the amateur spirit, and he is doing it for the love of it, whereas Abrams is doing it out of a chip on his shoulder. And so I
Yeah.
think I think we're shown that it's more satisfying for Little, and Abrams is still not really at peace after
Yeah.
he wins. So even though they're both praiseworthy, so
Well, you see that in the scene with Abrams and his trainer
right,
afterwards,
Yeah.
right? They win the race,
Honestly,
and
that's the only
Abrams
scene
can.
that's more crushing than the scene of his loss.
right,
Is
Yeah.
is his winning and the afterwards. I didn't mean to cut you off,
right,
but
right.
No.
So
I was just saying you see that Abrams can actually enjoy the thing that he's gotten because he instrumentalized it,
yeah.
right? And he instrumentalized it for a good purpose, right? He instrumentalized it to break through the barriers of anti-Semitism, but he still instrumentalized it.
this idea of amateurism, though, I think that even though the guys who are kind of voicing it are maybe not very likable. I think that I sympathize with their point of view, even though we're rooting for Abrams to
Yeah.
win. Especially because after watching this, I kind of read up on the history of amateurism and the Olympics, and kind of this idea that like anybody could just go and compete in the Olympics
Yeah.
and have a chance of winning. Any like underdog,
Yeah.
like any military didn't have the chance of winning a war, but like anybody, regardless of their like access to like leisure time to have a trainer for years and years, like could stand a chance and compete. And there is also this class aspect of it, at least in the English university context, where like it's considered undignified for a gentleman to play sports for money.
Yeah.
And much in the same way that in like the 16th century, a gentleman did not publish his poetry. He did not, was not a professional
Yeah.
poet. He circulated among his friends in the court. Someone like Philip
Yeah.
Sidney was not, his works were not published for the most part until after he died.
Well, I think because one of the other concerns of this film, it seems to me, is this question of integration. So this is a problem
Yeah.
for
Right,
both Little
right,
and for Abrams. Is how is
Yeah.
running? How is my pursuit of this integrated with the rest of me and the rest of my life? So in the case of Little, we have his sister expressing her concern that racing is taking up his time, taking him away from God, and is robbing him of stillness. She says, like, you don't even have time to stand still, which, for a Christian should be very troubling, because God is found there in the silence. But so too for Abrams, right? When he gets this criticism from the dons at the university, it's because this is meant to complete his education. His athletic development is meant to round out the whole package. But
Right.
what he's becoming is a fanatic, a professional, devoting all of his time to this sole purpose.
And they're right. He is being an individualist. I mean, what does his coach, Musabini, say? He says, you won this for us.
Yeah.
The two of us,
Which is why I
outsiders,
don't
not
think
for England.
I don't think the film frames his perspective renders it completely sympathetic. I do think we sympathize with him in the moment when he's being confronted and he stands up to the Dons, but I think we also are given reason to think, there's something's afoot, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. And obviously that's just made explicit and clear when he wins finally, and the music cue is not very good. It's still kind of unsettling, and it's like, wait a second. We get this great shot of him after the race, getting his picture taken and people coming up and greeting him, but all we see is the back of his head. It's like a very striking moment where you have this sort of weird sound cue that doesn't sound celebratory or elated. He's just won. And people are coming up to him all happy and smiling and taking his picture, but we're just seeing the back of his head and him standing there almost like numb to it all. And later, like we mentioned, the scene with him and his coach in the cafe at 3:00 in the morning drinking, it's so starkly lit. You get this like hard overhead lighting and these deep shadows cast across his face so that you can't even see his eyes.
It looks like an off-Broadway scene.
Yeah. Well, it's like very striking that we're not given the sense that he's in a good way even after he's won.
Right.
So although we can sort of get behind him and what he's doing in sort of, committing to excellence and resisting prejudice, but he's still wounded, and I think that if this film were made today, we would lose all of that nuance, right? It would be like, break through that glass ceiling and like you're going to accomplish like these goals and set these records, and then you're going to be happy and at peace.
One thing we can say for him is, though, he doesn't play for money. He's which was like the ultimate like shameful thing, in the Olympics. I mean, Jim Thorpe, who's like a really famous American athlete, had in 1912 had all of his gold medals stripped from him because they found out that he had very briefly accepted small sums of money for playing semi-professional baseball in his summers during college. And I think 30 years after he died, they reinstated his gold medals. Until like the 70s and 80s, this taboo starts to be broken down, and the rules are changed, I think, in the late 80s. One of the reasons is because it was very strongly suspected that the Eastern Bloc countries were already essentially sending professional athletes because they were paid full time by the governments and all that. But the other thing was just that television became a big thing, and it became commercial. And
that's one of the things you realize when you watch the movie is how deeply the Olympics have changed. From a point of national pride and sort of a healthy patriotism to like an NBC special. Right. It's so shifted. And to the point where you focus on amazing athletes like Michael Phelps and Simone Biles, but you don't focus as much on like the US team or the New Zealand team or the French team.
That's right. So I think that I don't know, I've never been a real devotee of the Olympics, to be honest, but I have to say, I think that the earlier ideal is far more appealing than what we have now, where it's just totally
I've never been a huge sports person either, and that's one of the reasons that I like this film, is that it's not really about the sports. It's about all of the underlying societal structures underneath and the morality underneath. But growing up and to this day, I can't ever really get behind like being super invested in football or other sort of modern sports, because it's like, okay, so the person playing for the Baltimore Ravens is actually from Houston, Texas, and he's lived and it's sort of like, okay, so they're great, and I know that like 90% of people are like gonna get annoyed at me for this, but I've never really understood it, because it's like, but it's not the Maryland team, it's not the Houston team, and one of the things that I loved when I was in college was the fact that when you're playing intramurals, right? When you're playing intramural sports of like the soccer team or the rugby team or whatever, is that the people were actually part of the college. They were part of the community. And so there was just a sense of sport that as James, you said the word integration, and I think that's a great word to sort of have in mind whenever you're thinking or talking about this movie, is like intramural sports, for me at least, were the closest that I've ever experienced like an amateur spirit
Right.
of sport being in rhythm with community, with education, and with
And that's
friendship.
partially why there's still a controversy over paying college athletes and
Yeah.
incentivizing them to come to a certain college and
Yeah.
things
But
like that.
aren't college sports now just seen as like an on-ramp to the professional
Yes.
Yeah, I
leagues?
guess so.
Yes.
The only sports that I ever get excited about is the World Cup, and for me, it's because some of that drama is still intact, because it's countries going head to head against each other, and for the most part, the players.
Also, soccer is just more fun to watch than most
That's
other
true.
sports.
That's true.